welcome back into the Play-by-Play, a sports media talk show from Awful Announcing, where we are looking back at the year that was in sports media. It is time to review 2024 with our Awfulies, an annual tradition on the website and also a growing tradition here on the podcast feed. I'm Brendon, Kleen, a staff writer at Awful Announcing. That's Ben Axelrod, a senior editor at Awful Announcing. We are joined once again by our wonderful managing editor, Sean Keeley, who handles this project for us and is here to guide us through it, defend some picks, explain some picks, debate some picks, and again, just kind of look back at 2024. So let's start there, guys. And Sean, I'll start with you. We'll get to some of the people, the moments, the business moves that kind of mattered, but how will you kind of remember this year? What will stand out to you? What will kind of be the major through line that sticks with you as we kind of close the book on 2024?
Well, I think there's a few different things that coincidentally also happen to be the storylines that were the most voted for internally on our staff for top sports media story of the year. The NBA media rights situation and all of that was such a major through line, even to the point where even when that was settled, that was still only half the story with how that impacted Warner Brothers and TNT and whether or not Inside the NBA was going to survive. And then it ends up at ESPN and we're still going. We still don't know how that's going to end. So that was a major through line. Tom Brady, his finally making it into the booth. There was that long stretch where we weren't sure if it was even going to happen. And there was so much hype going into that, and kind of a whimper at first when he first showed up in the booth. And, for some people, he's kind of gotten better. For other people, they're still like, what is...
Yeah, he got some high marks right after we bashed him for 30 minutes. So that was kind of brutal timing on our part.
Yeah. Totally. So it was like perfect timing, of course.
Yeah.
But, it's still, the jury is still out on the long term of that, or whether or not this will just be a sideshow that we remember from 2024. And then, I think women's sports in general kind of cementing itself in the cultural zeitgeist and the mainstream of sports media. I think we're just getting started with seeing women's sports and women's sports leagues get the awareness and visibility they deserve. And I think we'll look back on this year as when that dam broke open.
I guess you could almost say the things we were looking forward to lived up to expectations a little bit, right? Like,
For sure.
We knew the NBA media deal was coming. We knew Brady and his debut was going to be talked about. Caitlin Clark, we saw from a mile away. She did this once already in 2023. She just kind of doubled up and then went pro, and the ensuing chaos was predictable. It was like all those moments were just as big as we expected, which is, I guess, sometimes rare, but also cool. Ben, what did you make of 2024 in sports media?
If we're going to be honest, when I look back at 2024, excuse me, I think I'm going to think about Pat McAfee and Aaron Rodgers. And some of that is the timing of how this has all worked out. Is you had the big controversy at the start of the year where Aaron Rodgers goes on the Pat McAfee show and insinuates that Jimmy Kimmel's on the Jeffrey Epstein list. And I was talking to somebody around that time who was kind of vaguely familiar with what I do for a living and was kind of saying, like, this is our Super Bowl. Like, this is one of ESPN's biggest stars on his show. And they're attacking one of Disney's biggest stars and ESPN on ESPN Crime to a varying degree there. And then I think actually when you look at 2024, like, it was kind of a quiet year for Pat McAfee, but we just had these big explosions. And then you go to the end of the year where now we have all this stuff with Aaron Rodgers attacking Ryan Clark on ESPN airwaves. And, I kind of think, I thought we settled into this spot where, like, okay, this is what Pat's going to do on ESPN airwaves. He's going to bump up against it a few times, but I think we enter now 2025, kind of keeping an eye on how is this all going to shake out? Cause I don't think this Ryan Clark thing with Aaron Rodgers is going to go away. I think it's going to be really interesting to see the way this all plays out in the coming year.
Yeah, we will definitely be circling back to McAfee momentarily. And it was the first full year of him. You know, he won, I think, the Person of the Year award for us in 2023, but that was just because he got the deal and then started the deal. But he was only on air on ESPN for 3 months, 4 months of 2023. It just felt like longer. So, yeah, it was definitely majorly important. There's a million things we could say, but the one that's kind of jumping out to me, I would say, is it felt like this was the year where sports streaming finally really arrived in our lives, and that NBA deal obviously being a good example of it, where Peacock and Prime Video are going to be core parts of how NBA fans watch that sport. But we also had the Peacock wildcard game. We also had the Olympics and Gold Zone. You could list a ton of different examples there, but
think about back in January, we had the wild card game and all the angst and all the people who were upset about that. And now we're heading into this Netflix Christmas Day game. And I know there's concerns about the technology, but it's celebrated as like, this is going to be like the arrival of streaming in sports, like, and it's here to stay. So I think just in 12 months to see the way even we've shifted from covering it has been really fascinating.
And the Netflix, I mean, this whole bubble of they're going to do it. Are they not? When's it happening? Whatever. And this year was really them jumping in. The Tyson Paul fight, this Christmas thing, the WWE deal. They are a thing we talk about on shows like this and on our website now in a more tangible way rather than a hypothetical way or just reviewing documentaries from time to time. So, yeah, we can dive through, I think, a lot of this as we continue to go through. But remember to check out the Awfulies at awfulannouncing.com. That is where you can find write-ups and breakdowns and thoughts on all of these awards, if we call them that. They're good. Some of them are good. They sound bad because our website is
we've had a lot of people
negatively toned, but yeah.
Yeah, I've seen last year a lot of people pointed that out, that I won an Awfully, which I'm told is actually good.
It's like the Razzies, except we're actually complimenting you, you know.
That's right.
Okay, so our 2024 Sports Person of the Year, Sports Media Person of the Year, is Tom Brady, who, as we noted, the last time Sean was here just a little while back, we broke down in depth as far as his ups and downs, his good and bad in the broadcast booth as the number one analyst at Fox. But, I mean, in this type of a context, I think the best way to sum up the Tom Brady experience and why he was so important to 2024 is we have just never had somebody of this caliber in this context, at least, you know, in decades. I know there's some examples you could throw out, but when you add also the amount of money he's being paid, the prolificness of the NFL right now, all those things, like, there was, I don't think, anywhere else that you really could have gone, Ben.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. I believe I voted for him, and I think that when you look back on this year and you look at monumental moments, like Tom Brady in the Fox booth is going to stand out, and it's something that you've kind of tracked week to week, and he's like you said, like, this is unprecedented. We do not get athletes and stars of this caliber not only joining the media, but doing so where they're calling games in front of us for 4 hours on any given Sunday. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that when you look at not only 2024, but then looking ahead to 2025, it's going to be a story one way or the other, whether he's one and done, like you and I tend to think he'll be Brendon, or whether he's back for year two. He's going to call a Super Bowl in 2025. And so, yeah, I think if you look at this as an award that's not just looking back on 2024, but also kind of looking ahead to 2025, Tom Brady makes all the sense in the world to me.
I don't know how closely Sean looks at each vote or if he remembers who I voted for, but I did not vote for Tom Brady. But I'm curious who you voted for, Sean.
So I was in the pool. There were a couple of us who voted for Shannon Sharp, who I think got a little overshadowed because when you look at the entire year for him, one, he kind of solidified his spot as, as a first take regular. Also, as kind of there was that brief period where we thought maybe Stephen A. Smith might leave ESPN, and Sharp felt like, well, this is the heir apparent. This is the guy who's going to become, who's going to fill
Stephen A.
that.
Smith even basically told us he was.
He said that, right?
Yeah.
And so, there was that. There, his podcast, Nightcap, takes off, becomes a sensation. Kind of takes him to another level beyond just sports media. And then, of course, the infamous Instagram Live, where he accidentally captures himself having sex. And then that was a whole, so it was kind of like.
And plays it perfectly.
Yeah, right. And somehow, turns it into like such a great opportunity and kind of showcases like, this is how you can be a sports media or just a celebrity in the modern age, and use everything to your advantage. And so I know he wasn't like Brady was the pick. Brady made a lot of sense. But I think Shannon Sharpe like definitely made a strong case for himself.
I agree. I actually convinced myself out of voting for Shannon Sharpe because I didn't think other people would, and I've clowned myself there. I tricked
played
myself. I played myself, but I would also throw in, it's way back when Kimmel and Rogers were going at it, so we also might have forgotten. The Cat Williams interview was this year, which was like one of the biggest interviews in the history of podcasting on Club Shay Shay.
I think really it was January 3rd.
Yeah. So, and he's already teasing part 2. So maybe he'll be a contender in 2025 here as well, when maybe he finally gets this award. But my vote was Joe Rogan. I was kind of just trolling, but I always just think that we don't really think of him as sports media as much as we should. And so I didn't think he would win, but maybe I just, voted for him so we could talk about it here. Between UFC being, front and center this year in a lot of different ways, as well as his podcast, which again is very tangentially sports related, he was probably the person who wears any kind of sports media hat who mattered the most this year. So maybe that's not the definition of the award, but there we go. Okay. Best moment of 2024. Was this a tie, Sean? Or was this both are just kind of getting mentioned? We have Pat McAfee versus Norby Williamson, and we have Jeff Darlington, which I believe was the Tyreek Hill thing, the Scottie Scheffler thing, a combination of both. Who is getting this award here?
Well, my cat Finn is very excited to introduce this topic. So this was an interesting category, and to take people inside the Awfulies process a little bit. This was the only category that on the first vote, every single person voted for a different thing. And some of that was, voting for different, like a specific moment. Some people kind of voted for, maybe like a major decision and things like that. So we kind of,
these are open-ended when we vote. They're not they're not like multiple choice, so people can do whatever they want. Yeah.
Right. So like one person voted for Joe Davis's Freddie Freeman home run call, which was an epic call. And somebody else voted for like the moment on Hard Knocks offseason with the Giants when the owner, said, like, was basically saying his thing about Saquon Barkley. And so we had a little bit of a executive board meeting, and we whittled it down to about five moments, and the vote came out tied. And we figured at that point we might as well let it stand. And so, it was Pat McAfee calling out longtime ESPN executive Norby Williamson for sabotage and referring to him as a rat, which was, I believe, one of the first. It was in January, I believe.
Yeah, it was.
And just a stunning moment to think that happened on ESPN, and that there were no consequences for Pat. And then, a few months later, Norby's out. And even though a lot of people tried to make it clear that there was not a specific connection, metaphorically, you could see the connection between those two things. And so and then Jeff Darlington breaking the Scottie Scheffler story, literally being there on the scene as it's happening, filming it, letting the police know, like, hey, do you know what you're doing right now? And so it was a really great. What we said was, but this was a really great reminder. ESPN has had a lot of layoffs. They've kind of moved way more towards entertainment and these superstars than journalism. And it was a great reminder that when they really buckle in and have a story and like get into it, they can do a pretty amazing job as a journalistic endeavor. So yeah, I think we feel really good about saying these are two very disparate moments for ESPN that both were pretty memorable.
I wonder if we should change it to moment of the year, because it's like the McAfee one. Like, who is that best for? Like, I guess probably Pat McAfee or us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Best is right. Best is in the eye of the beholder on
everyone else that hates Norby Williamson at ESPN. I probably in terms of winning that battle, but yeah, it's funny because Ben, you mentioned like it was somewhat of a quiet year for Pat. I kind of disagree with that when I think of the Caitlin Clark waters that he waded into and various things. Kind of maybe we all just forget about it. Getting drunk at the bar in Ireland to start off the college football. Like there were a lot of every few weeks it felt like there was something, but this one, nothing lived up to that. We never got back to actively bashing one of your bosses on the airwaves and winning, the battle of control for the messaging and kind of value of your show at ESPN. Like that is, no one's ever done that at any network in any of the places we cover. So yeah, he did it.
And I was just saying, I was rewatching an old interview that Jamel Hill did on the Awful Announcing podcast. And she said, for as much as Stephen A. Smith is still arguably the face of ESPN, she said even he couldn't get away with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think she's right. And I mean, he also never would because he, right. A little bit of different branding, I guess, maybe between the two of those guys. But okay, so we have a top moment. We had the NBA rights media deal and the inside the NBA maneuvering around that. We'll have a lot more to say on that in the 2025 look ahead show that we have coming next week. And then Caitlin Clark, Greg Doyle of local newspaper columnist fame in Indianapolis, being a creep at her introductory press conference was our worst moment. We talked about Caitlin on the December 18th episode, so we will not go deeper on that again because as we mentioned on that show, it's pretty much a version of the same conversation every time. People don't know how to be reasonable about Miss Clark. But on to personalities. I don't remember last year's winners, and I should have had some of those pulled up.
I haven't pulled up.
Kevin Harlan, has he ever won before? I mean, we've only been doing this a few years, right? I don't think he has, and I think is it the versatility that stands out to get Kevin Harlan our best announcer award, our best play-by-play? Because he's not on the top events necessarily, and I don't know what people even associate with him, but if you're a big sports media nerd, you love Kevin Harlan, so it doesn't surprise me that he won, but why do we think that he won?
Well, I'll say the vote, there was definitely a spread in the initial vote. There were a lot of people who were considered. The top vote getters were Mike Tirico, last year's Awfulies winner, Ian Eagle, and Kevin Harlan. And I think Harlan ultimately kind of won out. I think because, I'll speak for myself. For those of us who, if you work on the weekend for Awful Announcing, you're often covering the games. If you're working evenings as well during basketball season and baseball and all and football, we live in a time where there are so many fantastic play-by-play announcers. I think any number of people could have won. I think Harlan wins just because when you look at the body of work and you look at, even if you just look at what Awful Announcing has written over the year, there are so many great Kevin Harlan moments to the point where it's almost boring to write about it, where you're almost like, of course, Kevin Harlan had another amazing call. Like, of course he elevated that play from a 9 to a 10. Like, it's just so automatic, and it's very easy to take somebody like that for granted, especially when, like you said, they're not the A guy. He's calling, the B or the C football game. He's calling, maybe a random basketball game. You're never quite sure where he is. If you're not somebody who pays attention to too closely to sports media, like you're never quite sure where Kevin Harlan's going to pop up, but you just know that whenever he does, he's going to do an amazing job. He's going to elevate the broadcast. And I don't know, I find it hard to believe that there are very many people out there who are ever upset when they find out Kevin Harlan's calling the game.
Yeah. I think there's something to also not being the top guy. Like it kind of makes you like the people's champ in a way. And I think it's kind of interesting that our best analyst is also a guy who's not on a number one team, although he very well could be. But just to echo what Sean said, like you just don't get play-by-play guys who create moments the way Kevin Harlan does. And so the fact that he does and does so on a fairly consistent basis, I think that's where he separates himself.
I did, maybe this makes me a hater. Maybe I'm going to be a jerk here, but we all love, and Kevin Harlan went viral calling the Super Bowl. No one hears that. I know we all like to talk about it, but like turn on the radio if you're gonna champion Kevin Harlan on Westwood One. I don't want you watching the game on TV. You gotta put your money where your mouth is. Go sit in your room, close the door, put the radio on, and enjoy it. If you claim to so much. I put Joe Davis, which is the partner for our Analyst of the Year, which was Greg Olsen. I just honestly, like, I have a hard time saying that they're not my favorite NFL booth the more that I watch them. And maybe that is because I live in Arizona. We always are on Fox in the afternoon window and often don't get the top teams. So maybe they've just called my team's games more than others, and I just have grown fond of it. But you couple that with the World Series call, I feel like Joe Davis had quite the year. But we talked about Greg Olsen. Studio host was Scott Van Pelt. Enough said. Took over Monday Night Countdown and is a legend. Studio analyst, though, Charles Barkley. We're retiring Barkley from candidacy here, because he's just going to win every year that he's active. And Sean, it sounds like is it the Charles Barkley honorary, the Charles Barkley memorial? What are we calling the studio analyst awfully here? He's not dead, but
the memorial just yet. I think might send the wrong connotation.
Chipper, alive and well. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll figure out the specific name, but I think we just feel like internally, like if we could just vote Charles Barkley best studio analyst forever, as long as he's, doing it. But it just kind of feels like at this point, kind of like with the play-by-play announcer, there's so many great studio analysts out there right now. It just kind of feels like a shame not to elevate, give some of them an opportunity to win this honor and kind of elevate them a bit. So hopefully people see that we think so highly of Charles Barkley that we just are taking him out of the running moving forward. And we'll see. It'll be interesting to see who wins the award next year.
Who do we think it's going to be?
I voted for Mina Kimes this year. I was a little surprised that she wasn't even second. I think it was Andrea Carter who finished second in our voting. And
yeah,
that's a good one.
Yeah. And so, but I mean, that kind of speaks to the spirit behind the idea of retiring Charles Barkley as a candidate. Is like, we don't need to give Charles Barkley an Awfulie for everybody to know like what he represents in sports media. So I like the idea of naming it after him. Maybe as we get down the line here, maybe we'll start naming more awards after multi-time recipients. I don't know if Greg Olsen's eligible just yet, but he's a 2-time winner now too.
He's getting there.
Yeah.
Well, when he takes his job back at Fox, he'll probably win it again next year. This one, speaking of what people represent in sports, Chris Russo winning Debater of the Year. I actually wanted to go back to Shannon Sharpe because I heard that, speaking of First Take, that he makes $6 million a year there. I think Andrew Marchand said that. That's crazy for 1 or 2 appearances a week on one show. They were having a conversation about like the middle class of ESPN isn't as, I think this was actually John Oren who won our Insider of the Year. He was talking about the middle class at ESPN is not as dead as people say. These stars are still making tons and tons of money, but he referenced Shannon as well as Mina Kimes, who Ben just mentioned, and some others as like there actually is a little bit of that middle ground. I don't know how much Chris Russo makes, but I was surprised to see him winning this award, given there's a lot of options of people who are shouting at each other about sports on TV.
I mean, I would just say I think Russo whatever you think of him, and certainly people have very strong opinions for and especially against him. It's hard not to take note of how he creates moments, and is if he's he's doing a lot of things that people dislike about the format, but in terms of within the format, he is doing it as well as anybody can do what is asked of these people. And so I think that's what kind of elevates him. Not to say there aren't other people who are doing a great job. And a lot of people would probably say there are people who do it better because they are more analytical or they do their homework or whatever. But there's just something about Chris Russo coming in and name checking a guy who played in the 60s for the Milwaukee Brewers, or if they were the Milwaukee Brewers at that point. And then just going off on a tangent about his flight and complaining about the Yankees broadcast. It's like, you just can't get that from anybody else. And love it or hate it, that's what he does.
I feel like I have almost like a unique perspective on Chris Russo in that I wasn't very familiar with him largely before I came to Awful Announcing. Like, I was aware of this sports radio legend named Chris Russo, and sometimes he'd have clips go viral that they'd make fun of on Lebitard, but I never watched like Mike and the Mad Dog or anything like that. So then I come in and I'm watching First Take every day, working at Awful Announcing. I'm like, who is this old guy shouting about gummies, doing traditional sports talk radio, but he's also not taking himself too seriously. And like, you realize that everybody you've listened to in sports radio your whole life is doing some sort of impression of this guy. And so like, I understand why he would be polarizing, but I think I'm still like in my honeymoon phase with Chris Russo, where like I look forward to Wednesdays on First Take because he just has such incredible chemistry, not only with Stephen A. Smith, but also with Molly and everybody who comes onto that set. And so, I'm still in my Chris Russo Mad Dog honeymoon phase here.
He also has perfected the art on his radio show of just fully manufacturing a straw man to serve as his debate opponent in real time. Like it is an art that I don't like. There's other guys who will like bring their producer in to kind of be the stand-in for the audience or take callers, which Russo still does, but he can just whip up an argument against something that no one is maybe even thinking. And you're there, you're along for the ride. So it's impressive. I had Nick right here, but we'll get to him later. Best acquisition, Nick Saban. There were a lot of acquisitions. We talked about Brady, also Bill Belichick, who is also a departure now already, and Jason Kelce, I would say, are kind of the highlights of the acquisitions. You could put Matt Ryan in there. You could put Greenberg or Scott Van Pelt in there, I guess, in their new roles, but those aren't quite acquisitions. I think this one is a no-brainer. Nick Saban stepping onto College Game Day, doing everything that we would have expected, and helping to rejuvenate and assert that show as the dominant college football show and be the authoritative voice on that sport that we expected. It's Nick freaking Saban on TV. He did what he came, saw, and conquered, right? I mean, that's kind of all there is to it.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to say he was the missing piece that we didn't realize College Game Day needed. And he's a perfect counterbalance to McAfee. If Herb Street were to leave at some point, like Saban like fills that space. I mean, like you said, like there's not much more to it than Nick Saban's on TV and he's going to talk to you about football. And it's like, what else do you need? One thing I do want to say, what was really interesting about the voting, Jason Kelce did not receive any votes in this category, which I thought was a little surprising.
You didn't back your guy.
I voted for Saban. I didn't think Saban was going to win for some reason, but I think I voted though for Jason Kelce, maybe for like best moment for ESPN, just hiring him and winning that sweepstakes. But I think Jason Kelce could like long-term be the winner here, but in the short term, I think it's Saban. I mean, Sean said exactly what I was going to say before I tried to talk over him, was like, he's the perfect counterbalance to McAfee. Like, Game Day went through this lull where it was like lacking energy. McAfee comes in, brings in this newfound youthfulness and energy. We reach a point with that where it's like, is this too much? Like, is this just like too silly? Is this like all this is going to be is like frat house television. Saban comes in, they create this bromance with their chemistry. It just counterbalanced the entire show. I mean, I thought Nick Saban was kind of everything everybody was hoping Bill Belichick could be. And I thought Bill Belichick was good, but I thought Nick Saban was great on TV this year. And it's interesting because Nick Saban's such a villain to college football fans, yet he gets on that game day set and like, I think he has unanimous approval.
I would guess that Saban probably goes to that show and goes to ESPN, even if McAfee doesn't. Mm-hmm. But considering McAfee kind of roped him into the family with those, what we now know were paid appearances on the McAfee show last season, it's a at least interesting kind of alternative history of those two being interwoven from the start as almost being a package deal, and what happens if any element of that gets disrupted. Where would game day even be? Also, not to forecast us out too far, but Ben Koo, who will be joining us next week to look ahead to 2025, fired Kirk from Thursday Night Football. Sean just took him off game day. So by the end of December on Awful Announcing's play-by-play podcast, Kirk Herbstreit will be, looking for a job. He'll be just out on the street at a certain point here. But let's get to Best in Television, studio show inside the NBA. I mean, I don't think maybe it's not at retire them and name the category after them territory, but I mean, the Emmys probably speak for themselves. I think this was a no-brainer.
I think we need to see the ESPN version first before we make a determination on if it's going to be eligible moving forward.
So speaking of things I did not know would win, first things first, getting debate show. I voted for it because I like it a lot, and I wrote a glowing piece on it. And I know there's some other evangelicals about the show out there, but I was not expecting any other people to vote for this show, mostly because I'm the only one who I think on staff usually has it on. I didn't know anyone else even watched this show. I thought First Take would win this in a landslide, but here we are. First things first.
Yeah, no. What was interesting was it was a very close vote between First Things First and Pardon the Interruption, and okay. I think it was kind of First Take did get some votes, but it was kind of this old versus newish voting breakdown. I can't say that I'm a committed viewer of First Things First, but I will say what I have seen, that is kind of the thing we were talking about with Russo, where if you want, they definitely have fun and they can get loud on that show, but that is a little bit more of we're going to debate, but we're going to do our homework. We're going to try to be a little bit more analytical. We're going to try to have like a real conversation about it. I think they have a really great package of, if you enjoy having a sports debate show on, you kind of get a little bit of everything. And I think Nick Wright, we identified Nick Wright as we said he was a real rising star last year. And I
do contract this year.
Yeah. And so I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with him because, we said that he could be the new face of Fox of FS1. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out and if that impacts the show because it deserves to be highlighted amongst their whole lineup.
Have you watched First Things First, Ben? How often are you tuning in?
No, I don't know if I've ever seen a full episode. I see clips on social media. It seems like a nice alternative to First Take. I voted for Get Up. I think Get Up gets slept on, and maybe it's you don't think of it as a traditional debate show, but it's kind of like if you're into sports talk, but you don't want the manufactured takes that you get on First Take, like Get Up accomplishes that. It might be a case like you where I'm the only person on our staff who watches it because that's right in my wheelhouse.
I'm asleep when Get Up.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. I think Get Up accomplishes a high degree of difficulty. I think there are a lot of reasons that show shouldn't work and it finds a way to work. So that got my vote, but yeah, I've never watched First Things First.
One thing Greeny pointed out when he was on the Varsity, which won our sports media podcast of the year, was that he feels like part of why the show continues to click even beyond what it finally kind of settled into when Beetle and Rose left it was the regular cruise day by day and getting chemistry and rhythm with those people and giving the viewers something to come to expect. And we've seen the same thing with First Take, right? Where, like you said, Russo, or it's Shannon Sharp, who we talked about, or we've talked about L. Duncan on Fridays, and now Cam Newton is in that group. And I think that is a big part of why Get Up has become more familiar to people, maybe, or more kind of comfortable.
I think another part of that too is you really see it as a launching pad for talents they're trying to elevate. And especially this time of year is always fascinating to me because Greeny's usually on vacation and they'll let Ryan Clark host it. They'll let Dan Graziano host it. Guys who aren't traditional television hosts, and that's a valuable skill set for those guys to have and for those guys to own. And you can see even, the way they're working in Harry Douglas now, and they give him his one little segment on Thursday where, he can go viral a little bit with everybody dancing. I just think it's cool the way they've used that show, especially after the rocky start it first got off to with the Mike Greenberg, Michelle Beadle iteration of it.
Back to first things first, so I can praise it a little bit. I think I wrote about like it is kind of playing with the form in real time in a cool way. If you watch it enough, it's having fun with itself. The segments are intentionally convoluted in an effort to kind of point out how convoluted they are, and I think Kevin Wildes, frankly, seems like a genius in terms of being like basically an on-air producer in real time while also hosting the show. Like, I just think he has a feel for it. That's pretty crazy. He was a producer, of course, in a past life at ESPN. But the thing that I guess I didn't write in the piece that I've even come to appreciate since then is they do one thing that I think actually drives people insane, especially when you're talking about like a Colin Cowherd, for instance, which is that people don't like that sports debaters do not remember their own takes and hold themselves accountable. That show is built around teasing and mocking each other for their own bad takes. Like we just wrote about with Around the Horn, David Dennis said Bill Belichick would never go to UNC like a day before it happened, and they made a whole show of it. That's the whole thing of First Things First is it's Brews Ravens. It's Chris Broussard's Raven. Every time they say Ravens, it's his team, and he has to own every up and down of the season, and you really build like their characters. They're like people, what they stand for in their kind of sports beliefs, and like the kind of pattern and the history of all of it. And I think it's just a cool format.
One thing, this isn't unique. I'm stealing this from Lebitard, but it is funny how Nick Wright has carved out his place in sports media by saying LeBron James and Patrick Mahomes are good. Like that we're at a point in the sports media landscape where those are considered outliers of takes is, hey, LeBron James is really great. And like, that's his shtick. Like, I think that's really funny.
Somehow putting a chip on a back-to-back Super Bowl champion's shoulder is like a lane. Yeah. All right. Sports Doc of the Year. Surprised me. Hard Knocks, Offseason, Giants. Sean, you alluded to a moment from that series earlier, and it definitely went viral. I will admit I don't watch Hard Knocks anymore, so I did not catch this. But how skewed was the voting? How much did this win by?
Well, in the initial vote, it barely beat out the Mr. McMahon documentary, and then we did kind of a head-to-head vote, and it won out by a little bit more. But I know, both of those were definitely the finalists. And honestly, the Hard Knocks offseason, the only reason it won and got so many votes was that moment, because that moment is going to live in infamy, especially depending on where things go from here with Saquon and the Eagles and what the Giants do. Because if the Eagles go on to win a Super Bowl with him or whatever it is, not that it even needs that, but it's just going to be one of those things that lives on as a meme, as a clip that gets replayed. That scene of the owner basically telling the GM, like, if you let Barkley go and he goes to the Eagles, like, I'm not going to be happy. And the GM just kind of got this smug look on his face, like, I'm not worried. It's not going to be a big deal. I mean, that's it right there. I honestly couldn't even tell you what else happened in that show. I'm not sure anybody.
It's what that show was made for, right?
Yeah,
those moments are what it's supposed to give us.
Exactly. So yeah, it's not the most complete docuseries ever made. But compared to so many others that have come out this year, because I think in general it was kind of a down year on the docuseries front. Just having a moment like that is just going to elevate you.
Best business decision, we had ESPN getting inside the NBA. Worst, we had TNT losing its rights to broadcast the NBA, even though they're keeping that show going from a production standpoint. Broadcast innovation of the year, we had the Peacock Gold Zone. I mentioned this a little bit on the, kind of the year that sports streaming set in. I know we talked about it, I believe in a test show actually, Ben, but my question here for you guys quickly is this replicable for anything else, or is this just going to be cool for the Olympics? Because I respected what they did. It was a huge accomplishment. I'm sure they'll do it for the Winter Olympics too, and people can, their mileage may vary, but I still think like this didn't prove to me that whip around is going to be like back in some kind of real way. I think it's like it works for the NFL, it works for this, for other things maybe less so.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's situational, even for the Olympics, because once you get another Olympics that isn't taking place in a good time zone for the U.S., like the whole appeal kind of goes away again. And so,
yeah,
it's replicable to an extent, but it still requires multiple events to be happening at a reasonable time for American audiences. And if you don't have that, then you don't have it.
I also think there's something to the Olympics where you don't necessarily want to tune in and watch the entirety of a game the way you might for the NFL. You might just want to see who won badminton or some obscure sport. And this like lets you kind of inhale all of it at once. Whereas, the other sports, even I see a lot of pushback from my NFL fan friends who are like, I'm sick of red zone. Like I like to watch full games and watch, get in the flow of a full game. And so, yeah, I viewed this as innovate. Like this was great innovation in that it helped Peacock find its footing and really like put their stamp on the Olympics coverage. But yeah, I don't view this as something like necessarily that the other entities are going to be able to replicate.
Yeah, I could be cool. They said that they are going to try it, and maybe they already have done it once or twice with Premier League, and I that kind of works with the windowing in the same way that the NFL does, where there tends to be a lot of games first thing in the morning, and you're usually only going to be able to watch one. They're on multiple different networks. If that gets popular, maybe that's another place that I could see it sticking. But the NBA has a version of it. Baseball has a version of it. I don't think people are really tuning in, and that's fine. But I guess we can close out here. And you guys can just tell me if any of these stand out. I have one that I think is the most interesting. Mentioned the Best Sports Media podcast was the Varsity Best Sports Radio personality. We had Chris Canty, who Ben and I talked up and championed after Ben wrote about him for the site a month or two ago. And Best Sports Radio show, maybe just because it is ending in its current form, the Michael Kay show. I thought the Dan Patrick show would win again. It did not. But what jumped out to you, Sean, about that bundle?
Yeah, so I just wrote up, I wrote up the, these categories, and the one thing I noted with sports media podcasts, obviously there was not a long history of this, but this was arguably the best year ever for sports media podcasting. A little
because
podcast
we launched ours, right?
I was going to say a little podcast called The Play by Play launched. There's this other one, the Awful Announcing podcast, you may have heard of. But no, John Oran starts the Varsity. Andrew Marchand has his podcast. Richard Deitch, Jimmy Traina. The sports media podcast that Marchand and Oran used to do together now is its own entity with Austin Karp, and they're doing good work. And you've got the press box, and so there's so many options now, and everybody kind of tackles it a little bit differently, which is really great. But yeah, I think kudos to Oran, a great year for him. We named him Best Insider of the Year, and I think the podcast is a big part of that because he just constantly shows you the access that he has. Getting like A-list sports media people, sports business people. And then also just, he's obviously, if something breaks in sports media, obviously we want people to come to Awful Announcing, but we don't blame them if they go to John Oran too, to find out what's going on.
Yeah, that
And then
podcast has become so good. I mean, so
yeah,
quickly. It's just it's very Puck. You know, if you listen to the Town, it has a similar vibe where they are talking about things you hadn't thought of yet, but that really matter. Where it'll just be, okay, like I mentioned, okay, Stephen A. Smith got a contract, great. Like everybody's going to talk about that. But then he brings up that middle class idea, right? Where it's like, actually, this kind of popular theory is not quite true, and the economics of ESPN might be a little different than you think. And you're like, okay, damn, like that, good good take. Like, okay. And then they do 10 minutes on it. And he brings on guests that aren't kind of in that same wheelhouse of the ones everybody else is always having on. He'll kind of go outside of it for the media types. So, yeah, he quickly rose to the top of this group. I think I voted for him.
I thought radio was interesting. I abstained from my radio vote because I just don't listen to radio anymore. Like I really don't like abstaining, and like I want to contribute, but I didn't feel good about giving anybody a vote just based on like vibes or energy or like who I thought was going to win. So I thought that was interesting. Is like I'm just like your stereotypical millennial who's like podcast only at this point. I guess that there are some podcasts on the list, but I thought of this as more linear radio, and I just couldn't come up with a vote that I felt good about.
There's not a lot
there. Yeah, exactly. It's a weird time for sports radio, and so there's a reason that you feel disconnected from it. I think to your point. I will say the Michael K show. There's definitely a little bit of a the show is ending, and everybody's moving on to new things. New York bias aside, we just end up interacting with the New York radio shows a lot, although I will say, like, there was just something about the Michael K show that we just found ourselves getting pulled towards a lot when we were, a clip would show up, or like, oh, you got to hear this rant that LaGreca just did, or him and Kay just got into it about Yankee fans, and it was a show that was consistently giving us great content, and Michael K is one of those guys again who it's like some people like him, some people don't like him, but he's a big point of view guy. He's not afraid to speak his mind and then let people see, decide how they feel about it afterwards. And so yeah, it felt like a little bit of a thank you and a send off for them, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see how their new shows kind of exist now separately.
Yeah, big year of change in New York radio, at least as it pertains to him and the network and everything. But they'll be here, just in a different form and not together. But that's all right. And yeah, I mean, nationally, it's like Cowherd, Rome, Eisen, Patrick. It's kind of it as far as national shows.
Greeny.
I knew he had a show.
Leave.
And locally, I mean, yeah, you listen to your own thing, but there's not a lot of local shows that really matter outside of New York. So different. I would say the end time, not just a weird time, the end time for that medium, unfortunately. That'll wrap us up, though, guys. Great year of sports media news and changes, and we will be back next week talking about the year to come in 2025 with Ben Koo. But for now, hit follow or subscribe if you have not already. We're here for you every week, not just the next two. We're also at awfulannouncing.com covering this stuff moment to moment, and we're on social media, X, Instagram, TikTok, and beyond. Wherever you're finding content, we are there for you, and we'll talk to you next time.